Imagine making a salad for dinner tonight. You open a fresh bag of lettuce from Walmart, serve it to your family, and think nothing of it. Then, just days later, the FDA issues an urgent warning. Don't eat it, throw it away immediately. Not because of dirt, not because of mold, but because it may be contaminated with a microscopic parasite that can cause weeks of severe illness. What's even more confusing? The FDA later said one key test may have been a false positive, yet the nationwide recall still wasn't lifted. So what really happened? Why are these products still being pulled from shelves? And what does this reveal about the food supply millions of Americans trust every day? Let's investigate. At first glance, this looks like a simple lettuce recall. But the deeper you look, the more questions emerge. This story isn't just about one bag of salad or one Walmart product. It's about an FDA investigation, a microscopic parasite called Cyclospora, confusing laboratory results, and a recall that remained in place even after one positive test was later considered a false positive. It also reveals how today's food supply chain can move a single shipment across dozens of states in just days, affecting millions of consumers before anyone realizes there's a potential problem. So before we can understand why this recall is still making headlines, we first need to understand the tiny parasite at the center of it all. When most people think about contaminated food, they usually imagine bacteria like E. coli or Salmonella. These are names we hear often because they have been connected to major food recalls in the past. But the organism behind this lettuce investigation is something very different. It is called Cyclospora. Cyclospora is a microscopic parasite that cannot be seen with the naked eye. Unlike bacteria, it is a completely different type of organism that survives by entering the human digestive system and causing an infection called cyclosporiasis. The way people become infected is surprisingly simple. A person can get sick after consuming food or water contaminated with Cyclospora. In the case of produce like lettuce, the contamination can happen during farming, harvesting, washing, packaging, or transportation. If the parasite reaches food before it gets to your kitchen, it can potentially travel thousands of miles through the supply chain before anyone knows there's a problem. And this is what makes leafy greens especially challenging. Lettuce has many layers, folds, and uneven surfaces where contaminants can hide. Unlike foods that are peeled or cooked before eating, lettuce is usually consumed raw. That means there is no cooking step that destroys potential contaminants before the food reaches your plate. Many people assume rinsing lettuce under water removes every danger. But with parasites like Cyclospora, washing may not always be enough. A quick rinse can remove dirt and some surface contaminants, but it does not guarantee that every microscopic organism has been eliminated. Once someone consumes contaminated food, symptoms may not appear immediately. In many cases, illness can take several days or even up to 2 weeks to develop. The most common symptom is persistent diarrhea, but people may also experience stomach cramps, bloating, nausea, loss of appetite, weight loss, increased gas, and extreme fatigue. For some people, the infection can last for weeks if it is not properly diagnosed and treated, and that is what makes Cyclospora different from many foodborne illnesses people are familiar with. It does not always announce itself immediately. It can quietly enter the body, delay symptoms, and leave people wondering where the illness came from. This parasite behaves very differently from the bacteria most people have heard about. And to understand why this particular recall became national news, we have to go back to the beginning, the single shipment that started raising questions across the country. To understand how a simple bag of lettuce became the center of a nationwide food safety investigation, we have to follow the journey of that lettuce backward, from grocery shelves all the way back to where it began. Because before it reached Walmart stores, restaurants, and kitchens across America, this lettuce had already traveled through a complex supply chain involving farms, processors, distributors, and retailers. The timeline begins in June. Somewhere in Mexico, iceberg lettuce was harvested and prepared for shipment. Like millions of pounds of produce that enter the United States every year, the lettuce moved through a system designed to keep fresh food constantly flowing. After harvesting, it was transported, processed, packaged, and eventually handled by Taylor Fresh Foods, one of the largest fresh food suppliers in the country. At this stage, there was no public warning, no recall, no indication that anything was wrong. The lettuce continued moving through the supply chain. But this is where the story becomes complicated. Most people imagine a recall as something that happens to a product sitting on store shelves. But modern food distribution works differently. A single shipment can be divided into thousands of portions and sent to different locations before a problem is discovered. In this case, much of the recalled iceberg lettuce was not sold directly to everyday shoppers. A large portion went through food service channels, meaning restaurants, cafeterias, institutions, and businesses that prepare food for customers. This is why many consumers may never see the original product packaging. However, two products did reach retail shoppers. They were sold under the MarketSide brand at Walmart stores. MarketSide iceberg salad MarketSide shredded lettuce. These products reached consumers across multiple states. By July, concerns began growing. Testing and investigation efforts raised questions about possible Cyclospora contamination. The FDA became involved, and Taylor Fresh Foods issued a voluntary recall as a precaution to prevent potentially contaminated products from being consumed. The recall covered products distributed between June 29 and July 16 across 27 states. For consumers, the warning was simple. Do not eat the recalled lettuce. Throw it away. Return it for a refund. But then something unexpected happened. A laboratory result that helped trigger concern was later questioned, with the FDA reporting that one positive sample appeared to be a false positive. And yet, the recall remained active. So why didn't the warning disappear? Why continue a recall after a key test result was called into question? To answer that, we have to look at the confusing investigation that followed, and the reason health officials decided caution was still necessary. But then, just when it seemed like investigators were getting closer to understanding what happened, the story took an unexpected turn. A laboratory result connected to the investigation created a new layer of confusion. On July 19, the FDA reported that a positive sample from the recalled Taylor Farms lettuce was later determined to be a false positive. In simple terms, the test result that initially suggested Cyclospora contamination was no longer considered a confirmed finding. For many consumers, this raised an obvious question. If the test was wrong, why was the recall still active? Why would health officials continue warning people not to eat a product if the evidence behind the warning had changed? The answer comes down to how food safety investigations work. When agencies like the FDA and CDC investigate a possible contamination event, they are not only looking for confirmed illnesses or one single laboratory result. They are trying to prevent a potential outbreak before more people are exposed. Food recalls often operate under what is known as the precautionary principle. The idea is simple. When there is a reasonable possibility that a product could harm consumers, officials may act before every piece of evidence is complete. Because with food contamination, waiting for absolute certainty can come with a serious risk. By the time investigators confirm every detail, thousands of people may have already purchased, consumed, or served the product. That is why public health decisions are often made with incomplete information. The goal is not just to prove that a product caused harm, it is also to prevent possible harm while investigators continue searching for answers. In this case, the FDA and CDC investigations were still ongoing. Officials had to consider multiple factors: where the lettuce was distributed, how much product had entered the market, whether additional testing was needed, and whether consumers could still have affected products in their homes. For regulators, the decision was not simply about one test result. It was about managing risk. A recall can inconvenience consumers and businesses, but a missed contamination event could potentially affect thousands of people. And this is the part most people never see. Behind every recall is a difficult decision. Act early and possibly remove safe products, or wait for more evidence and risk, allowing a dangerous product to remain available. But if that laboratory result wasn't confirmed, what exactly convinced investigators that keeping the warning in place was still the safest choice? For many people watching a recall announcement, the first reaction is not panic. It's a question. What if I already ate it? Maybe the lettuce was used in a salad yesterday. Maybe it was mixed into a sandwich. Maybe a restaurant served it without anyone knowing there was a potential problem. And because Cyclospora does not always cause immediate symptoms, people may not even realize there is a connection. This is what makes this type of contamination difficult to identify. Unlike some foodborne illnesses that can make people sick within hours, Cyclospora infections can take time to appear. According to health officials, symptoms may begin as early as a couple of days after exposure, but in some cases, they may not appear for up to 2 weeks. That delay creates a challenge. A person may eat contaminated lettuce on Monday, feel completely normal on Tuesday, and then suddenly experience symptoms days later. The most common symptom of Cyclospora infection is persistent diarrhea, but it does not always stop there. People infected may also experience stomach cramps, bloating, increased gas, nausea, loss of appetite, weight loss, and fatigue. For some individuals, the illness can continue for weeks if it is not properly identified and treated, and that creates another problem. Many people initially mistake these symptoms for a normal stomach bug. They assume it was something they ate at a restaurant. They blame stress. They think it will simply pass. But with Cyclospora, identifying the cause matters because treatment may require specific medication prescribed by a healthcare provider. This is why health officials recommend that anyone experiencing symptoms after consuming recalled products contact a medical professional. The important thing to understand is that not everyone who eats contaminated food will necessarily become seriously ill. Risk can depend on multiple factors, including the amount consumed, individual health conditions, and how the body responds to the infection. But food safety investigations are designed to prevent people from reaching that point. The purpose of a recall is not to create fear. It is to remove uncertainty. When officials announce a recall, they are essentially saying, "We don't know everything yet, but we know enough to take action." And this brings us to the larger issue behind this story. The lettuce recall is not only about one vegetable, one company, or one shipment. It reveals something much bigger about the modern food system. Every day, millions of Americans buy fresh produce believing it has already passed every safety check. But behind every item in a grocery store is a complicated journey involving farms, transportation networks, processing facilities, and safety inspections. And sometimes, despite all those steps, problems can still appear. The real question is not whether the food system ever faces risks. It does. The bigger question is, how does the system respond when those risks are discovered? And that answer reveals why recalls, even confusing ones, are such an important part of protecting consumers. The Taylor Fresh Foods lettuce recall may seem like a story about one product, one shipment, one parasite, one warning from the FDA. But when you look deeper, it reveals something much larger about the way food moves through America. Because the lettuce sitting inside a refrigerator today may have traveled farther and passed through more hands than most people ever realize. Modern food systems are built around one goal: speed. Consumers expect fresh fruits and vegetables to be available every day of the year. A person in Texas can buy lettuce grown thousands of miles away. A restaurant in Florida can serve the same type of produce as a restaurant in California. This system allows Americans to have constant access to fresh food. But there is a trade-off. The more complex the supply chain becomes, the harder it can be to track a problem when something goes wrong. A single farm can supply multiple processors. A single processor can supply multiple distributors. A single distributor can send products to hundreds of locations. And by the time a problem is discovered, that product may already be spread across several states. That is exactly why traceability is such a critical part of food safety. When investigators identify a possible contamination issue, they are not only asking, "Is this product dangerous?" They are also asking, "Where did it go? Who received it? How much is still available? How quickly can we remove it from circulation?" Every hour matters. Because food is different from many other products. A defective electronic device can usually sit on a shelf until it is repaired or replaced. But contaminated food has a limited timeline. It can be purchased, prepared, and consumed before anyone realizes there is a concern. This is why government agencies often choose action over waiting. A recall does not always mean a company intentionally did something wrong. It does not automatically mean the entire food system failed. In many cases, it means the warning system worked. Testing found a possible problem. Companies responded. Government agencies investigated. Consumers were notified. The process is designed to stop a potential issue before it becomes something much larger. However, recalls also reveal the challenges facing modern food production. As global supply chains expand, food safety becomes more complicated. Produce can cross borders, travel long distances, and pass through multiple stages before reaching a person's plate. The journey from farm to table is no longer simple. And that is why consumers are seeing more attention around food recalls today. Not necessarily because every product is becoming more dangerous, but because testing methods, reporting systems, and public awareness have become more advanced. Problems that may have gone unnoticed decades ago are now being detected and investigated. The real lesson from this lettuce recall is not that consumers should fear every bag of produce they buy. It is that food safety is an ongoing process. It requires constant monitoring, fast communication, and cooperation between everyone involved, from farmers to retailers to the agencies responsible for protecting the public. Because behind every item in your grocery cart is a story. And sometimes that story reveals just how connected the modern world has become. But there is still one final question. After all the warnings, investigations, and confusion, what should consumers actually take away from this recall? At the beginning, it looked like a simple question. Is this lettuce safe to eat? But after following the journey from the farm in Mexico to processing facilities, distribution networks, Walmart shelves, and finally into a nationwide FDA investigation, the answer became much more complicated. Because this was never only about one bag of lettuce. It was about how modern food systems work. It was about how quickly a product can travel across the country before a problem is discovered. And it was about why public health officials sometimes have to make difficult decisions before every answer is available. The Taylor Fresh Foods recall created confusion for many consumers, especially after the FDA reported that one positive sample appeared to be a false positive. People naturally wondered, if the test was wrong, why continue the warning? But food safety decisions are rarely based on one single piece of information. They are based on risk. When officials investigate a possible contamination event, their responsibility is not only to confirm what happened. Their responsibility is also to reduce the chance that more people could be exposed while the investigation continues. That is why recalls exist. They are not meant to create panic. They are meant to create awareness. For consumers, the lesson is simple. Pay attention to recall announcements. Check the products you bring into your home. Follow official guidance instead of relying on assumptions. And understand that contamination is not always something you can see, smell, or taste. A product can look perfectly fresh and still be under investigation. At the same time, this story should not create fear around fresh produce. Fruits and vegetables remain an important part of a healthy diet. The goal of food safety systems is not to convince people to avoid these foods. The goal is to make sure problems are identified, investigated, and handled as quickly as possible. Because behind every grocery item is a complicated network of people working to move food from farms to families. And when something goes wrong, that same network has to move just as quickly in the opposite direction to find the problem, remove the risk, and protect consumers. A bag of lettuce may seem like an ordinary purchase, but this recall showed something most people rarely think about. Every item in your grocery cart has a journey. And sometimes, understanding that journey is the difference between ignoring a warning and knowing exactly why it matters. Because food safety is not only about what we eat, it is about understanding the hidden systems that bring food to our tables every single day.